On Thursday morning, we left our Wright River anchorage and headed south on the ICW towards the border between South Carolina and Georgia. However, we encountered rush hour traffic as we approached the Savannah River in Fields Cut. We eventually managed to pass a sailing catamaran who was traveling just a little slower than we were. Then it looked like a large yacht was going to pass both the catamaran and slow bells as the three of us approached the Savannah River. Then we noticed a large collection of containers floating above the trees that separated Fields Cut from the Savannah River, and we correctly guessed that there was a container ship underneath all those containers. This marked the second time on this trip that a large ship had surprised me on a blind turn, and AIS was starting to sound like a really good idea. We had a fairly short day of travel in pleasant temperatures and cloudy skies. In mid-afternoon, we hung a right turn into the Vernon River and anchored near the town of Montgomery for a couple days to let some wet weather pass through our area. Friday was mostly rain and fog at our anchorage, but it did give me an opportunity to install a new seawater pump for the generator. Dave had picked up the necessary parts the day he drove his rental car from Virginia to Charleston. It took some persuasion to get the pulley off the old pump, but I was eventually able to get the new pump installed. By Saturday, the weather had decided to let us start moving again, which was a good thing. We were running low on food, and Dave and I had to split the very last banana for our morning smoothie. We didn't get moving until around noon, but this time it was not because we were lazy. We had Hellgate to contend with. Hellgate, not to be confused with Hell's Gate in New York City, is an infamous spot on the ICW because of its narrow channel and shallow water. We had selected our anchorage in the Vernon River because it was just north of Hellgate. Our plan was to pass through Hellgate at 1 p.m., which would be an hour before high tide. For us, Hellgate was easy, and that was for three reasons. One, slow bells only had a 4-foot draft. Two, we used the tides to our advantage. And three, the Navionics charts were absolutely amazing, as usual. On our passage through Hellgate, we never saw less than 10.8 feet on the depth sounder. We had another short travel day on Saturday with plenty of sunshine. I initially intended to spend the night at Tom Creek Anchorage, but once we arrived there, it seemed a little on the narrow side to me. We decided to continue on a little further. We ended up going to a much wider anchorage just south of St. Catharines Sound. The place we dropped anchor is called Blackbeard Creek on Google Maps, but it's called North Newport River on the nautical charts, so I guess you can take your pick. It was so warm that evening that we didn't even need the heater. On Sunday, the forecast was for sunny skies and 10 knots of wind. However, by the time we were making our way through Sapelo Sound, we were becoming a little skeptical of the 10 knots portion of the weather forecast. Fortunately, most of our travel day was through waters that were protected from the wind, although any southbound ICW boater will have to occasionally deal with the glare of the sun reflecting off the water ahead of the boat. We pulled into our last anchorage of the trip at Sapelo Island. Although the water in the anchorage was protected from the wind, the top of my boat was very much exposed to the wind, which was blowing perpendicular to the channel. We dropped the anchor in the middle of the channel and let out as much scope as we dared, which put us very close to the marsh along the eastern shoreline. Fortunately, the wind died down as evening approached, and the current moved slow bells back to the center of the channel. We spent an extra day at anchor next to Sapelo Island. My ICW trip was rapidly coming to an end, and by some strange coincidence, our food supply was also rapidly coming to an end. Dave and I got the dinghy in the water and headed over to the ferry dock. We had a nice walk on the island, and I was able to see the Marine Institute, which is run by the University of Georgia. Later, back at the ferry dock waiting room, Dave pointed out a sign that said, "Beware of alligators." Oh, sure, now they tell me. Tuesday would be our last day of travel to Brunswick, Georgia. The good news was that we had a pretty good breakfast in bright sunshine. The bad news was that after breakfast, there was very little additional food left on the boat. Therefore, Dave and I were highly motivated to get to Brunswick before dinner time. We continued our policy of leaving the anchorage late in the morning so we could be traveling at a time when the tidal height was rising rather than falling. There is no lack of shallow water in this area, but once again we were able to remain in comfortably deep water by using both the tide and the navionics charts. We also consulted the online waterway guide each day to identify the areas where other boaters had identified potential problem areas along the ICW. Unlike myself, Dave had been to Brunswick before, and he spotted that space-age looking bridge over the Brunswick River when it was still an hour or so away.
Yes, it is.
Around 4:30 in the afternoon, we pulled into Brunswick Landing Marina, got the sewage tank pumped out, tied up Slow Bells in her new winter home, and walked into town for a great hamburger dinner at Tipsy's. In the days that followed, Dave would head back to his home in Virginia, and I would start work on a very intimidating winter to-do list of boat projects.